And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and let's talk about bad Magic design. Magic design, the direction it has been going in the last few years. I'm not a big fan of it. This will just be a giant rant video, me venting about a whole bunch of things that I see happening in the game of Magic that I don't love. And yes, a lot of it, of course, is because of Commander. I will be touching on that quite a bit in this video. So, of course, it makes it very relevant for my channel. But just in general, as a guy who's been playing Magic for almost 30 years, I don't love the directions things have been going. Let's start out with the mechanics. And since I've been doing my channel, which is just about 4 years now, I really have not liked pretty much all the mechanics that have come out. Most of them are overly complex. Reading the card explains the card. Yeah, not so much anymore. Not with a lot of the things that we've been seeing come out. A lot of the mechanics now, you actually have to go watch like an instructional video to figure out how they work. Hey, remember regenerate and banding? Yeah, those are two old mechanics in the game that were phased out because guess what? They're too complicated. People couldn't figure out how to use them properly. That's right. Those mechanics used to be considered complex. Compared to the stuff we're seeing today, they ain't nothing. Are you kidding me? This to me started back in Ikoria, which was the home of, in my opinion, two of the worst mechanics we have in the game, Companion and Mutate, but for different reasons. Companion, of course, if this card is your chosen companion, you may cast it from outside the game, but of course, it doesn't work like that anymore. I don't know if this is the only time this has ever happened in the history of the game. It's the only time I can think of where an ability was actually completely changed how it works in order to power it down because it was so ridiculously busted. Of course, now it says, if this card is your chosen companion, you may put it into your hand from outside of the game by paying 3 mana at sorcery speed. Not because it was doing anything horrible in Commander, but of course because it was breaking every other format. Again, we have mechanics like Storm and Phyrexian Mana, just these incredibly powerful mechanics throughout the history of the game. Some people might even say they were mistakes. Guess what? They never errated or changed that. Those things still work exactly the same as they used to. Companion, they actually nerfed this mechanic so it doesn't work so good. I think it's safe to say that was a mistake. Mutate was a mistake in my opinion for a different reason. I don't think it's a bad ability. I think it's pretty interesting. It's just insanely confusing. Again, I'm a guy who understands the rules really well. I've been playing this game for a long time. I still don't understand all the possible interactions with this mechanic. And of course, anybody new to the game is going to have a heck of a time figuring out as well. I suggest if you make a Mutate deck as your Commander deck, better brush up on the rules there. That is an incredibly confusing one that people will be asking questions about for as long as this game exists. Moving on to dungeons, which we got in, of course, Forgotten Realms. Not a big fan of that. I wasn't a big fan when I first saw it. I'm still not a big fan of it. I don't like the idea of creating this thing that I can't interact with. I know people have said, okay, well, a dungeon is just this game piece that keeps track of things. No, but there's actual things that are happening there. You're scrying and creating stuff. It is something that is interacting consistently with what's happening in the game that I cannot interact with. I don't like that. I don't like having something in the game that I can't interact with. That's my biggest beef on dungeons. Didn't like that mechanic either. How about battles? Not a big fan of that, and I don't know if they're going to revisit this. Of course, battles came out in March of the Machine, and they have the type Siege, which led people to believe that we will sometime in the future be revisiting battles. Not sure if that's the case. I hope it's not. I don't like them. I don't like just creating a new card type in the game of Magic, personally. I don't think it's needed. The rules interaction, again, still confuses people. I imagine a lot of people don't realize that you are giving this to your opponent to protect, that you want to attack, but yet it is still under your control. I imagine there's a lot of people that don't even realize that. You still do control this as you are attacking it. Very weird interaction there. I think the thing that bothers me about it the most is they made it sideways. Why did they do that? There was no need for them to make this card sideways. It's silly. Just makes it harder to look at. I hate that. All right, let's get more specifically into card design with regards to Commander. Of course, Commander has impacted the game of Magic more than any other format has before, and not in a good way. And I talked about this briefly in my video, sort of touching on this subject in general. Designing Magic cards for the Commander format is really bad for every other format, as people have learned, because Commander is so different from any other format, right? The flagship format of the game of Magic was Standard for the longest time. And so all Magic Magic cards were designed for Standard. And then you just had to figure out a way to make them work in other formats, right? Commander, of course, being the best example of that. Cards weren't designed for Commander, so you just had to find the ones. Hey, Rhystic Study. Wouldn't you know it? That happens to work good in the Commander format. Aren't we lucky? Now everything is designed for the Commander format, which is unfortunate, and designed for the Commander format in a number of ways. Let's take a look at Glaring Fleshraker as a perfect example here. 2 and a colorless mana Eldrazi drone 2/2. And of course, already if we're printing Eldrazi stuff, it's likely going to be tribal. A lot of things are heavily tribal themed now because of Commander, right? It's likely the most popular archetype in the entire Commander format. So you're going to see a lot more of that, obviously, right? There's 2 things this card's doing, which you see all the time now, kind of annoys me. Whenever you cast a colorless spell, create an 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token with sacrifice this creature. So it's giving you that trigger that whenever you do this thing, so obviously it's going to be in a deck where you're doing that thing. Any deck where you're casting colorless spells all the time. Also, whenever another colorless creature enters the battlefield under your control, Glaring Fleshraker deals 1 damage to each opponent. It is a win con, right? This is, hey, you guys need a win con for your Eldrazi deck. You need a win con for your colorless deck. We're going to throw a card out there for you, right? So it is one of those cards that they are very specifically printing as, here's that card because you need help in that specific deck in Commander. And the other thing that annoys me that they do a lot on Commanders as well is the setup and the payoff. This can't just be one of these abilities. It's got to be both. So as you cast your colorless spells, you are creating Eldrazi spawn tokens, which will then trigger the last ability as well. So the card's just doing everything all wrapped into one. Another thing that I have been annoyed by with Magic design lately. And again, you could blame that on Commander. You could blame that on just generally power creep, or let's make cards so easy that they play themselves. The payoff setup thing is something that has really annoyed me with Magic design lately. While we're on the topic of tribal cards, tribal spread, I'm calling it, is another symptom of the Commander format. Of course, this has been seen best most recently in Bloomborough, where just looking at a card like Valley Rotcaller, you can see exactly what I'm talking about, right? Whenever it attacks, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of squirrels, bats, lizards, and rats you control. Now we're not even doing one tribe, we're going to do 4 tribes all in one. So that means anybody playing a squirrel tribal, bat tribal, lizard tribal, or rat tribal deck will have to run out and buy this card, right? So again, this fits into a couple of different categories where let's make it just so easy for this to fit into so many different Commander decks, but also let's make it so people have to go out and buy this for all those different tribes, right? If this guy was just squirrels, then only the people playing maybe Chatterfang decks would run out and buy it. Now everyone playing rat tribal decks or bat tribal decks is going to go out and buy it as well. So that plays into this bad design as well. Okay, let's get into another thing that has really bothered me lately with card design, and that is the flavor of the game, I think, is just going away. This is a big one for me. And again, maybe Commander is to blame here. I'm not sure, but the flavor of the game used to be super, super important. And I'm not necessarily talking about the storyline. I was never a huge storyline guy with the characters and everything. That's another thing that I've heard from people that know more about it is suffering quite a bit, but just the flavor of actual cards. Back in the day, cards used to say, summon this card, right? Because the whole idea is you were summoning that creature to do battle for you. You're like a wizard, your deck is like your spell book, and each card is like a spell you're casting. That was essentially the idea. And of course, your lands are the mana that you're tapping to cast that spell. You're summoning these creatures onto the battlefield, and they're doing battle with this other wizard's creatures, right? That was the whole idea. And a lot of that basic concept of the game originally has kind of gone. A big one for me is, there's 2, power and toughness and keyword abilities. Both of those are just, let's just throw whatever we want on there because nobody cares anymore, right? I'll give you a perfect example. Ellen Harbreeze. She's a busybody, right? Look at her baking bread. Hey, I imagine she's a baker. She's a human peasant after all. But boy, that bread must be heavy, or those ovens must be hot, because she's a 2/4. That's right. A soldier token, which is a 1/1. She's going to kick that guy's butt with her bread baking because she has a 2 power, which is double a normal soldier token, and a 4 toughness. It would take 4 soldier tokens to take her down. That's how tough she is. Quite the baker, right? Let's look at Gimli of the Glittering Caves as a converse example here. We all know Gimli from the movies, I'm sure. Look at that armor. Look at that battle axe. He's a terror. Oh wait, he's only a 1/1. Sure, he's got double strike, and yes, you can put counters on him, but he starts as a 1/1. Where's the flavor there, right? Again, this is all about flavor. It makes no sense that Ellen Harbreeze, the bread baker, could kick Gimli's butt. but that makes zero sense in the flavor of the game. At least Gimli having double strike though makes sense. A lot of commanders now have keyword abilities that make no sense at all. They only have them because they fit with what that commander is doing. There's no real reason for it. Of course, ward is the best example here because as we all know, they're just putting ward on every commander now just so it makes it harder for people to remove your commander because of course you're building your deck around your commander, right? So they're just putting ward all the time on commanders just so you can more easily build your deck around them. Again, that's 100% the reason they're doing that is for commander players. A couple I've brought up recently, Mr. Foxglove, which is a Bant Fox Rogue, has lifelink because why? Why does this have lifelink? Just seems like they stapled that on there just to give it a keyword ability. Mrs. Bumbleflower was another one that it's a Rabbit Citizen 1/5 with vigilance. Why does she have vigilance? There seems to be no specific reason for that to be on there. They just stuck it on there because every commander now needs at least one evergreen ability on it. Kind of annoys me, but it maybe annoys me even more when they put it on there purposely to make that commander better, right? And I've said this quite a bit with creatures that have attack triggers or deal damage triggers, right? Whenever I'm reading a new commander and I see menace or haste, and Kylox is a great example because it has both, I know that commander is likely going to have an attack trigger or a deal damage trigger. Does it make sense that this guy has menace, ward 2, and haste? Maybe, maybe not. Likely they just threw those keyword abilities on there because they knew this was going to be a commander. And of course, it has an attack trigger, so it's got to have menace because you don't want it dying in combat, so it's got to be harder to block and you got to attack with it. And it's only a 4/4, so let's give it menace so that your opponents can't easily block it and kill in combat because it costs 7 mana and then you're going to have to cast it again, right? Why does an Izzet spell slinging commander have menace? Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but let's put it on there so our commander doesn't die so easily in combat. And of course, the haste is so that we can get that trigger right away. After all, that commander does cost 7, right? So putting evergreen abilities on creatures makes not a lot of sense anymore. They just stick it on there because it fits with the mechanics of what the commander's doing rather than it's for flavor. A flying creature has flying. A spider, for example, would have reach, right? That is the reach ability. Why do spiders all have reach, guys? And in fact, of course, it never used to be called reach. They ended up changing it to reach. Why do spiders have reach? They got webs, right? It's a flavor thing. Spiders have webs and they catch flying stuff in them. It's the flavor of the creature. It makes sense for them to have reach. That ability was invented for spiders for that reason. And now we're just putting reach on everything just because it's kind of tall, maybe. Really lost with the flavor in that aspect. And I don't love it. Another thing that we've lost recently is the color pie in general. And again, partially to do with Commander because Commander, everything is color specific. So for that reason, we've seen so many color pie breaks over the last few years, right? Colors used to specifically do certain things well and certain things not so well. It was integral to how the game of Magic worked. And now, we've blurred the lines quite a bit, right? And white probably is the worst perpetrator here. And I would say it's because of all the Commander players that were complaining, hey, white doesn't ramp or draw cards very well, right? We heard that all the time. I did, at least, when I first started playing Commander. So you started seeing it slowly. Every single set that came out, you'd see another white card that was ramping okay. I mean, it was a better option than the one we had before. And then the card draw. And there was a better option and then a better option. And now we've gotten to the point where I think white is one of the best colors in the format at generic card draw. They've gone too far, in my opinion. We see this with removal as well, right? I put Feed the Swarm in my deck, sure, but man, I don't love it because a black card that just destroys a enchantment just feels so wrong. I remember when this card first came out, I was super pumped about it because I'm like, hey, now I have a card I can put in my Dimir deck to destroy enchantments. I hate that I can't deal with enchantments in my Dimir deck. Okay, but wait a minute, that's part of the game. Part of the game is certain colors can't do certain things. And black can't deal with enchantments. Well, now black can deal with enchantments. And they've been doing this more and more and more. And I think they've even said that going forward, black's just going to be another color like white and green that can very easily deal with enchantments. And we all know why, because of the Commander format. Feed the Swarm was printed because of the Commander format 100%. That's why it's been reprinted in so many Commander sets. And now, after 30 years, we're going to change what black can do in the game of Magic because of Commander. Don't love it. The other thing I don't love about ColorPie breaks is that every color does everything now. I guess this sort of fits with what I was already talking about, but more so with mechanics. And again, it used to be when a set came out, certain colors would do certain mechanics and certain other colors would do different mechanics. You wouldn't have all 5 colors doing whatever that new mechanic is. It was relegated to certain colors, sometimes 1, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, but you almost never saw a new mechanic come out in a set and every color was doing it. I'll give you a perfect example, and I'm not going that far back. I'm going back to Shadows of Innistrad, where we got the Investigate mechanic, right? Or Creating Clues, great mechanic. I was a big fan of that one when it first came out, and it was only in bad colors. You couldn't do it in black or red. Investigating was relegated to those colors because, again, the flavor of the game, it just seemed to fit the bad colors. It didn't fit red and it didn't fit black. But guess what? Now every color is doing Investigate. Again, I blame Commander. There is very few mechanics that are specific to certain colors anymore, and I don't like that. I liked when you had a mechanic come out, so Transmute would be another favorite of mine. Only black and blue do that because those are the colors that made sense to be doing a mechanic like that. There are no red, green, white, or colorless Transmute cards. They're only blue and black. I like that that's the case because certain mechanics fit certain themes, right? That's just another thing that kind of bugs me is we just don't see those color specific mechanics really at all anymore. Every time a new set comes out, whatever that new mechanic is, every color has access to it. And of course, the big one that I really am not a big fan of is, and of course, entirely to blame on the Commander format, the legendary creatures. It used to be something special. When you had legendary creatures come out in a set, it's like, wow, Gerard. Man, I was so excited when I saw Gerard for the first time, or Volroth. Like, wow, what a big deal that was. Not a big deal anymore, right? Of course, we used to have like 3, maybe 4 legendary creatures in a set. Now we have 30 or 40. There's nothing special about them at all anymore. They're all very much engineered for the Commander format. The flavor, the card design, all of that has been completely demolished when it comes to legendary creatures, in my opinion, over the last 4 or 5 years. And it really does make for laziness in deck building, which is maybe one of the things that bothers me most about it, right? You look at Vren the Relentless. If a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. And of course, at the beginning of each end step, create X/1/1 black rat creature tokens. This creature gets +1/+1 for each rat you control, where X is the number of creatures your opponents controlled that were exiled this turn. Oh, well, good thing our commander's already exiling our opponent's creatures, so we don't even have to build around that, right? I don't even have to put any thought into how I'm going to be building this deck. This deck builds itself. I mean, there are different ways to build it, but this deck builds itself. Your commander, again, has the setup and the payoff. I really, really don't like that. That's probably the number one thing as far as Magic design over the past 4 or 5 years that has annoyed me the most is these super easy to build around commanders that are just super on the nose. They have the setup and the payoff, no deck building required. It's obvious what you want to be doing. And of course, we see these in the hundreds, not even exaggerating, every single year. It's also completely taken the flavor out of legendary creatures and the uniqueness of legendary creatures as well. I mean, I gotta blame Commander, sort of, but at the same time, I gotta blame the guys that are printing the cards for the Commander players so that they run out and get them. You know, I guess I don't have to blame the Commander format here. I guess I have to blame the popularity of the Commander format combined with the guys at Wizards of the Coast that want to be making lots of money off of it, right? So lots of blame to go around, I suppose. Whole lot of negativity there, I know, but this is something that's really been bothering me a lot lately, and I actually have been slowly taking notes on the things I have been noticing on Commander design for the last year or so, and had to make a video just venting about all of it. I'm sure if you have only been playing Magic for a couple of years, you're going to wonder, what the hell is this guy talking about, right? I probably sound like an old man yelling at clouds. I'm sure I'll hear that comment down below, but I like to give my opinion and air my grievances on my channel. That's what I'm doing here, and that is it for today.